What is going on in the tech world? What's going on with AI, with all these layoffs? It seemed like everything was fine, everything was great. There were plenty of tech jobs out there. In fact, you kind of remember there was this sort of joke a few years ago, like if you lose your job, like you're working in another industry, learn to code, right? It's sort of a snarky response. Learn to code, right? Because there's always tech jobs out there. And you had all these people trying to break into IT. Cybersecurity was a big one, right? Like go to school, learn cybersecurity, right? Whatever cybersecurity means. Very ambiguous term there. But the idea was that there were these tech jobs everywhere, and all of a sudden, I would say last year for sure, definitely this year, all these layoffs start coming, and it's like companies stop hiring as many tech jobs, and then now you have folks getting laid off. And everybody's like, well, it's because of AI. It's because AI is coming in and it's replacing everybody's jobs. And this was sort of a fear for a long time, not even before AI, just the idea of automation in general coming in and taking people's jobs. You'd have whatever you're doing, if it could be automated, then a computer or a program would do your job and you wouldn't be needed anymore. And I always thought, that's kind of I can understand that thinking, but at the same time, if you know how to do something and your job can be automated, somebody's got to run the automation software, right? So whatever's automating your job it's not going to take care of itself, right? It needs to be built, it needs to be managed, it needs to be maintained. So, if it's automating your job, you're probably in a pretty good position to be the person that basically takes care of the thing that's automating your job. So having said that, it's like we're not really seeing that with AI. It's almost like, well, AI can replace multiple people, so maybe we can have one person that manages all the AI stuff. A lot of other people just aren't needed. So I've seen this in different industries. I've seen this in anything that requires like data processing. So just for example, like claims processing, insurance claims processing, anything where a human has to go in and look at and analyze documents, quality assurance, quality control. Anytime you have a system where there's sort of a checklist of like, this is what you look for, this is what you do, and as long as these criteria are met, then you sort of check the box. And it required this human judgment. And now we see, well, AI can basically replace that. Not to say that AI is right or it's going to be 100%, just like a human's not going to be 100%. But again, there's this sort of twisting of efficiency there, where now it's AI can do the work of multiple people. I heard the phrase, somebody said something like AI is like having thousands of engineers, or depending on the context, thousands of doctors. And we really shouldn't be too surprised by this, because just think back a few years, several years, if you didn't feel good, if you felt sick or you were having some kind of problem, what do? You go on Google and you start Googling your symptoms and you start reading through stuff. And, a lot of people would diagnose themselves, or they would get some ideas, they would narrow it down to possibilities. And they go to the doctor and they'd say, I Googled this and I think it could be this, this, or this. And of course, the doctor kind of like, rolls his eyes like, oh, whatever, Dr. Google, ha ha. But a lot of times, you know what? It would be right. Whatever that short list was of possibilities, and there maybe there's more than one thing going on. Maybe Dr. Google was actually right after all. And that feels very threatening, obviously, to a doctor. It's going to feel threatening. Same thing with somebody who's working in any kind of specialized industry, knowledge-based industry. You're going to have somebody that says, am I really needed here? If Dr. Google, and now it's, Dr. AI, Dr. Chat GPT, or whatever model you're using, if that can replace the human judgment, then really what's there left to do? So let's bring this back around to the tech industry. And of course, people think of tech, people think of code, they think of software development. I came from the world where I was really more on the operations side, where I was building servers, I was configuring software, I was building things, I was writing scripts, I was writing code as well, I was doing all those things. But the crazy thing is, it used to be you would go online, you would look up something, you would look up the manual, you would look up the documentation if you needed to know how to configure something or if you needed to troubleshoot something. I'm a networking guy. gosh, it used to be the Cisco, the CCIE, Cisco Certified Internetwork Expert. That was like the top paying certification for a long time. And getting that required you to, number one, you had to pass a really difficult written test, which is basically like a multiple choice test. And then you had to go drive or fly to Research Triangle in North Carolina, and they would do it in different locations, but that was kind of the main hub. And there would be like initially it was like I think it was a 2-day lab. So you were there maybe like 8 hours a day for 2 days, troubleshooting, configuring, like this is how you prove to yourself. This is how you attain this certification. So it was like a very much a hands-on, I know how to do this, I can do this. And the only access you had to documentation was like the official Cisco documentation. Okay, so it wasn't like there was no AI, there was no chat GPT or any of this stuff. So it was like you have all this in your head, you have this muscle memory, you have this knowledge. Well, now, if you need to configure a network, you don't have to memorize or even look up all these Cisco iOS commands. You just ask for the code essentially. And I read something that was, I thought, very, very profound, very insightful. Taking technical requirements and converting those into whether it's code, whether it's like configuration commands, whether it is design, that is really no different than language translation. Okay. It's like if I want to translate English to Spanish, we have these software translators, Google Translate, there's all these different translation softwares, Babbel, translating one language to another. And we can do this in multiple ways. We can go from one language to another language to another language. We could even do from like English to sign language, right? I haven't looked, but I would bet that there is something out there that would translate English to hieroglyphics. Okay, I'm sure it exists. That concept of translating from one language to another is really no different than translating from, like, say, how do I configure my router in this way, translating those requirements to the specific configuration commands. I need something that will do this. I need to write an API. I want to use fast API. I want to write in Python, and these are the endpoints. This is what I want it to do. Kind of like, here's my requirements. Okay, so I need a post endpoint for this. I need a get endpoint for this. Another get. You're going to get code back. It's probably like 95% going to work. There may be the more complex the requirements are, and the more integrations you have. Yeah, you're going to run into things where you have to tweak it. But you know what? All you do is say, look, I tried this code, I ran it, it didn't work, I got this error, what's wrong? And then, whatever model you're using is going to say, oh yeah, good catch, you're right, let's try this, let's fix it. And it'll just keep going and keep going and keep going. And it could, every once in a while, it's just going to like barrel down this path of wrongness where it's just going to be wrong no matter what you do, and you kind of have to start over. But, it makes sense, right? If you rather than say, let's get all the software developers in a room to debug a problem, we just keep plugging away and say, all right, AI, what's going on? What's wrong? How do I fix this? Give me some ideas. I've said before that AI is basically fancy Google, okay? It is fancy search. That's all it is, because all it's doing is takes this big corpus of information. So just think of like how much data is stored in Google, right? How much Google has indexed. Take that data, all that data, plus whatever is in your library, your books, whatever's out there, videos that were transcribed to text, right? So these LLMs, what we're talking about, these large language models, they're all text-based, but you can take video, you can take music, you can convert things to text, you can even take pictures that have no text, convert those to descriptions, and then add those into your model. So just think of this as like hyper Google or fancy Google. And so now, instead of asking Dr. Google about a problem, right, and then having to go through the search and like say, I'm going to go to this site and look here and research this, well, now you've got this model that sort of can, in a human-like way, explain things to you. It can tell you, like, this is what I've found. So it's almost like if you have your own assistant that goes out and compiles this information. They go to Google and they say, this is what I found, and they distill it for you. That's all AI is really doing. So when you have that kind of capability, you're essentially, like I said, it's automating things that a human could do, and it's doing it in a very fast and efficient way. Let's talk about the future here. And of course, I'm not a futurist, and I don't like to make predictions based on human behavior because humans are inherently unpredictable. But I will say this: AI is definitely not going away. We've got an entire generation here, a younger generation, that is growing up using AI the same way my generation used Google and Yahoo and Alta Vista and some of these older search engines. Okay, so AI is like that. It's going to become a utility. It is definitely not going to go away. Just like I said, fancy Google, right? When we want to know something, we're going to ask AI. I mean, I found myself doing this. And whereas I might used to go to a search engine and search and look for a website, now I might go to like Perplexity, and I might go to Perplexity and put something in, and I like Perplexity because it will actually give me references. So if I want to go and do my own research and read a little bit more about something, it'll kind of tell me where it got its information from. And so it'll kind of guide me down, usually the right path. Not always, but sometimes it'll guide you down the right path. But it's a starting point, and it unsticks you. It keeps you from getting stuck. And that's such a huge thing now is I mean, again, I'm old enough to remember, like, you could go on Google and search for a problem and not find the answer. Okay. So when you were stuck, you kind of had to figure it out on your own. And so that's sort of the way I learned. And that's why I am basically a jack of all trades. Like I know a lot about pretty much everything in the tech world. Sounds like I'm bragging. I'm not bragging. I'm just saying, like, because of the way we didn't have AI and even Google and search was sort of limited, I just had to learn on my own. Understanding the fundamentals was really was key. It sort of forced me into that. It forced me to learn the fundamentals, like, and I saw, like, all this stuff is really, it's kind of the same thing over and over again. Technology, not just, it doesn't just go in cycles, but it's literally the same problem being solved over and over again in a different way and at a different level. And that's kind of, I think, a downside there with AI, is that it abstracts so much away from us that now folks, who are younger generation who's using AI, just like the same way we use Google, they're using AI and they're just getting the answer. I'll give an analogy here to the calculator. Somebody who had to learn math by hand, all of a sudden they got the calculator, and they don't really need to know how to work through a problem. They don't need to know carry the one and all this kind of stuff. They don't need to know, like, how do I deal with a negative exponent. Just punch it in the calculator and get the answer. And that's sort of what's going on here with AI, is, or I'd say that's the danger, and it's definitely going on, is let's just get the answer. So now we have this putting trust in AI, which may or may not be right. And there is a risk of losing the fundamentals and losing the critical thinking aspect, because, I mean, and we've all, I'm sure, any one of us who have used any of these models, you go through and you start asking it stuff, and it's going to give you stuff that's outdated. It's going to give you stuff that's just outright wrong, and it will be very confident about its wrongness, right? And when you correct it, it'll say, "Oh, my bad, you're right." And you keep going and you keep going, and then all of a sudden it's wrong again. And you're like, "No, no, no, I already told you were wrong about that." So it has no, like, understanding. It has no consciousness. It's not a person, right? It doesn't have that understanding. It doesn't, and it can't, right? It's literally just jumping from one word to the next, to the next, to the next. And it's doing so based on what it was trained on. And what was it trained on? You and me, right? It was trained on stuff that humans created, okay? So if humans are wrong, which they are a lot, then AI is going to have to be wrong, right? Because it's based on what humans have come up with, what humans have created. So yeah, it's going to be wrong. So now how do we determine that? How do we determine truth versus falsehood? How do we determine right versus wrong? And if we don't have that foundation, we don't have those fundamentals, then we're just trusting AI, then we're kind of, honestly, we're kind of dumb. And unfortunately, I've seen people, they'll be like, "Oh, I asked whatever the model is, I asked the AI about this and it said this. End of story." And it's almost like, and they don't say it right outright. They don't say, like, that's it, that's the final word. But that's sort of how they act about it, is, well, that's what AI said, and AI must be right because it knows everything else. The kid that memorizes the dictionary or the encyclopedia, and it's like, well, that kid knows everything. So you ask that kid something and they give an answer, and, well, they must be right because they know everything. And that's sort of the danger here. with AI. And even with Google, I've kind of seen this with Google. There was several years ago, I was talking to somebody. He insisted that Google had indexed every word ever created by every human. I mean, it was kind of a weird idea. I've got some folks in my family who are long since gone who have written things, and I'm pretty sure those are not in Google, and they're not, right? But just this idea that people can convince themselves so easily that the entire corpus of all human knowledge is going to be available in an AI, it's like, it's kind of ridiculous. It's kind of silly. But people believe silly things. People believe silly things all the time. Let's talk about where do we go from here. For the past many, many decades, the highest paying work, what we will call knowledge work, and I forget, somebody coined the term, and it was this idea that the highest paying work, the work of the future, is going to require knowledge. It's like you sit at a desk and you think about things and you sort of like work through problems. That was sort of considered the next thing after the Industrial Revolution, right? Where we had machines now automating human labor. Now it's like we've got humans thinking through problems. So we've got all these sort of conceptual problems we need to work through, and we're going to have people do this. All right. Research, code, there's different fields here, right? But there's theoretical research like medicine, science, technology world, but I remember like when Intel was, how do we make faster processors? Like, what are the physics involved in making faster processors? Okay, so there was this sort of like intersection of the Industrial Revolution with knowledge work. And that's what gave us fast computers. That's what gave us smartphones. That's what gave us, all this crazy technology that we have now, self-driving cars, GPS. And now it's given us large language models as well as vision models. Okay, so this isn't just like words and text. We've got models for music, for video, right? As we've all seen those silly videos where somebody's, saying something they didn't say. The knowledge work, right, which would, of course, include creative works, creative arts. All of that's considered knowledge work. And now it can all be automated to a point. I've heard the term AI slop, right? Some people call it AI slop. It's kind of junky, People sort of use that term pejoratively. Let's say you're charting the temperature, just like you've got a little weather station and you're charting the daily temperature. And so it like goes up and it goes down. And as you're charting it, you can draw a trend line, right? So you can kind of draw a trend line, so it'll follow the data points, and you can even come up with a formula, okay? Essentially, you're coming up with a model of the daily temperature, okay? Now, is that model going to be right? Is it going to hit every single data point exactly? Probably not, but it's going to be close. And that's exactly what AI is. It forms a model based on this corpus of input, and the model's going to be really close. It's going to be close most of the time. It's never going to be 100% like a human, okay? It's going to be off. And sometimes it's off in really bizarre ways. It'll be like over the top cheesy, or it'll be kind of dry and boring. It'll repeat itself. It'll be wordy. It'll say things over and over again, and you're like, man, just give me the answer, So a lot of times I've seen this especially pretty consistently across the board with all different models, is you have to tell it, be concise, limit your answer to 3 sentences, because otherwise it's going to give you paragraph, bullet points, emojis. So again, that's all kind of based on a model, right? It's all based on a model. So what we're doing is we've taken this knowledge work and we've sort of turned it into a model. Let's get into the weeds a little bit more here with this. Let's say you are a designer, you design, graphics, and you've got your whole collection, your whole portfolio of things that you've done over the years. And you put them on the internet. You've put this on the internet for years, and everybody can go and they can look at your stuff. Now, if somebody were to just take your stuff and claim it as their own and use it, you would be like, that's plagiarism, right? That's my intellectual property, and you're infringing on that. You're just taking it and not giving me credit, and not, you don't have my permission to do that. What these AI models have done is they will go and they will, what we call train. They're trained on stuff that's fed into them. So they're trained on, say, your graphics, the stuff you've created, and they develop a model based on that. Plus, other people's stuff as well. But they develop a model based on that. That model's there, and somebody goes in and they say, show me a picture of, so let's say that you've as part of your portfolio, you've got a like a drawing of a dragon, let's just say. A dragon breathing fire, just sitting at the top of a mountain breathing fire. Okay. And somebody goes in and they say, look, give me a picture. They're saying to the model, give me a picture of a blue dragon eating cake, okay, and smiling. That drawing is going to look a lot like your dragon, right? That dragon is going to look like your dragon. I wouldn't even be surprised if he's sitting on top of the mountain eating cake, okay? You see what I'm saying here? Is that plagiarism? They didn't take it exactly, right? They didn't exactly copy it, but it's based on what you created, okay? And so this is why I say that I believe that AI and all of this advent of AI and it being so widely used is going to ring in the end of this concept of intellectual property. So this idea of that I created something, it's mine, I can control like who does what with it. That honestly, I just don't see how that is going to continue when we have AI models being built upon everybody's stuff. You know, they say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Obviously, flattery is not the motivation here behind any of this. It started out as research, right? We just like, what can we do with this? I recall very clearly in 2008, there was a company called Numenta. I think it's still around. The guy that started Numenta was the same guy that invented the Palm Pilot, which, if you don't know what the Palm Pilot is, think of like your smartphone, but it's not a phone. It's basically this little tablet. The original one had like just a LCD screen, so a monochrome LCD screen. It had a stylus. It was kind of like it was before BlackBerry, so it was like the BlackBerry before the BlackBerry. Numenta was doing a lot of work in this space of what we now call artificial intelligence. It was called machine learning. And basically it was like you would have a picture, maybe a video, and the machine could identify what was in the video. He had working code. This was in 2008. I mean, I remember this like it was yesterday. He had working code. I was able to run this on a pretty low-end laptop. Little video with like a helicopter, sort of like almost hidden. It's kind of hard to describe, but you think of like a grid, just sort of a monochrome grid with these pixels, and then the pixels are sort of flashing on and off, and then you've got this helicopter that's made of these pixels, and it's sort of moving around. And the idea was that a human could easily look at it and say, I see the helicopter. Like you would instantly see the helicopter as it's moving around. But that's difficult for a machine, but yet they were able to pull this off. So think about that. I mean, that was 17 years ago. So yeah, if we were able to do that kind of thing back then, we can do much more now. Anyway, the point is that this all started out as research. And I think a lot of people were surprised. I think a lot of people were surprised that these large language models worked as well as they did. So I remember GPT-3 a few years ago. I thought it was so silly because it was like you would try to talk to this thing and it was nonsense. It would just come up with some nonsense. It was like an old chat bot. So I remember in the 90s there was like these people would write these little chat bots that just always gave the same kind of responses, be the same, 40 or 50 responses over and over. Really, really goofy. So GPT-3 was kind of like that, but then GPT-4 came out and it was like, whoa, like this is way different. And the reason it was way different is because they were training it on so much more data, okay? And that's kind of the key here is that you train it on a little bit of data, it's going to give you some kind of goofy stuff. But when you feed enough data into it, and when I say enough data, I'm talking about how these models are trained. I don't think people realize this. It costs millions and millions and millions, and it takes weeks, if not months, to train these models from scratch, okay? It is expensive. It's very expensive. Keeping them up to date is very expensive. And the reason I'm saying that is we are going to get into a situation, and I always say this, I always say AI is always out of date. And people are like, well, no, it's not. It's connected to the internet. You can go on ChatGPT and it'll give you the current date. It'll give you the current news. This is true of all of them now. They're all connected to the internet, okay? But the thing is that new information has to be integrated into the current model. And again, this costs money. It is not free to do. And we sort of are seeing it from the consumer perspective where we're like, I'm just using this thing and it works and I love it. And yeah, I'll pay $20 a month or whatever to use this. But to train it, it's very expensive. So there's going to come a reckoning, right, where somebody's going to say, listen, we've spent a lot of money on this and GPT has hundreds of millions of users. You got a lot of people that are paying for it. But at some point, once the novelty wears off and people start crunching the numbers, they're going to say, like, all right, how do we sort of scale back to what we really need here? We're sort of in this, like, isn't this cool phase. I would call this almost the freemium phase, where you have this new product, this new thing that comes out, and it's like, try this for free, and everybody uses it, everybody loves it, it's the best thing. Yeah, I'll pay whatever a month for this. Like I said, I think it's going to stay around. I think people are going to use it. I don't think it's going away. But once the reality sets in, people are going to say, well, you know what? We really need some humans back here. We oversold AI to ourselves, maybe, or somebody else oversold it to us. And it's not fulfilling the expectations, right? You're going to have this situation where there are going to be a lot of companies who have kind of laid off people very abruptly, like, look, we're going to go with AI. We don't need, they sort of like just shoved everybody out the door. Those companies are going to be begging for people to come back once they realize the AI, they've spent a lot on AI and it's not giving them the ROI, the return on investment that they need or that they anticipated. So you're going to kind of have sour grapes there. You're going to have some sour grapes. Businesses are in the business to make money and they kind of have to do what they need to do in order to make that happen. There's a tendency to kind of go with what works in the moment and not listen to the other side of it. So what I'm telling you right now, like I said, we're in the hype cycle of this. We're in like very much the AI can do everything. We can just replace a lot of people with AI. We're in that phase right now, but I'm telling you, people watching this video a couple of years from now, I'll put it at probably like 2 or 3 years from now, if not sooner, they're going to be like, yeah, I remember he said that. So you're going to have this situation where the knowledge work is not going away. It cannot be fully replaced by AI. You're also going to have another issue there where you're going to need people to clean up after it. Think of AI as kind of like a very smart toddler. People are like, oh, wow, that's amazing. Look at that. Look at what it can do. But it leaves it doesn't clean up after itself. It makes a big mess. Somebody else has to come along and clean up after it. People use AI to clean up after AI. So they'll try to like do some kind of quality control agent to go in and clean up after AI and say, like, make sure it did this, make sure it did that, make sure, you remove this and remove that. Maybe it works 80, 90, 95%, but there's going to be that residual there that has to be cleaned up by a human. I was even going through doing something very simple. I'll tell you what it was. It was my resume. And so I had like a huge list of skills, and I just said, I just need this sorted like alphabetically and categorized. Like that's all I need. Just do this for me, okay? So I had AI do this for me. And I said, do not leave anything out. And it gave me the list and I said, make sure you didn't leave anything out. It goes, I didn't leave anything out. So I go through and I spot check it and I'm like, wait a minute, this skill is missing. I think it was Terraform. It's like Terraform's missing. Oops, my bad. Yeah, you're right. Okay, I put it in there. And so now I'm like, my level of trust was up here, and now it's like, okay, hold on now. This isn't like complicated work, right? We're just saying this is stuff we say computers are really good at. But this is the kicker. And a lot of people, again, they don't understand this about AI. AI models are terrible at computation, which is ironic because they're running on computers. You would think, isn't it doing some kind of computation? And the answer is no, it's not. They don't do computation. These models are literally, they're language models, okay? All they're doing is predicting the next word. Has nothing to do with computation. Like I said, that surprises a lot of people because we've got things that'll solve word problems, solve math problems, okay? But try it. Create a word problem. I wouldn't look one up on the internet because you don't want something that's been like, it's been trained on. But come up with your own word problem, like a math word problem. Think of something like that involves a system of equations and tell AI, solve this for me and explain how to solve it. And what you're going to find is that it's going to go through and it's going to start out right and it's going to make a lot of sense. But then at some point it's going to do something really weird and you're like, that doesn't make sense. Why did it do that? And it's going to give you a wrong answer. Okay. And I've done this multiple times. It will give you the wrong answer. Why is it giving you the wrong answer? Because it is not actually doing any calculations, right? It's not acting like a calculator, which again, crazy irony there because these things are running on computers. So you would think it would know to check itself, but it doesn't know anything because it can't. It's just a model. It's just predicting the next word. And this is kind of the next step, and the next thing with AI is that now if you want this thing to really replace a human, it has to be able to identify, the model has to be able to identify, this is a calculation problem. This is not just, it has to stop. It has to say, like, hold on now, we're not predicting the next word anymore. We're being asked to perform a computation. Now we have to integrate that model with something else. Okay, so it can either be integrated with a human in the loop, where basically it stops and goes to a human, which would be kind of like maybe like in a military context. We don't want to do it just based on AI. We want to have a human kind of stop. Somebody's got to approve or push a button. Software deployment, right? We want to, before we deploy to production, like AI's done everything. It's, hey, let's say it's written the code. It's done all the unit tests. It's done all the integration tests. It all works, but we don't want it to deploy to production yet. We want to let a human do that. Let a human push the button. There's an old saying, computer cannot be held responsible, so a computer cannot make a management decision, or should not make a management decision. You can't hold the computer responsible if your deployment messes up, or something bad happens because of automation. So we want to have a human in there that we can hold responsible if we need to. AI models are terrible at calculation. Not that they're terrible at it, they just are incapable of it. They're not capable of performing calculations. The closest thing they can do is take a calculation that's already been done and they just spit it out, right? So this is why if you say what is 2 plus 2? Well, it's going to say, yeah, 2 plus 2 is 4, because that's just common knowledge. It's trained on that, okay? But like I said, word problems, so if AI can't do it, that's a clue. That's a clue of we're kind of running up against the limits of it there. You're going to have people that have to clean up after AI. There's going to have to be, like I said, for this to completely replace humans, and I don't believe AI is ever going to completely replace humans. And the holy grail of this is what's called artificial general intelligence, or AGI. AGI is where AI is fully integrated. It can distinguish between just reciting facts versus actually performing calculations. And it also would require sensory input. Okay, so these large language models, they're just basically trained on, like I said, words. And again, if we're talking about vision models, they're trained on pictures, video models trained on pictures and metadata. So for AGI to happen, which I don't think it's even possible, but for it to happen, at a minimum, the model would have to have senses, right? It would have to be able to see, it would have to be able to hear, it would have to have touch, it would have to have some kind of tactile sense, it would have to have some sense of space, where it is in space, time. So there would have to be a lot of things feeding into this. And this is the key, training these models is expensive and it takes a lot of time. It would have to know how to filter out things, right? Our brains are designed to filter things out very effectively. I mean, like, you watching this, you're probably not even aware of all the stuff that's going on around you. Is there a bug on the wall behind you right now? Or if you're outside, is there an animal nearby? Look up in the sky, right? Is it cloudy? Is there a plane up there? So we filter all kinds of things out, things you're hearing, things you're seeing. What do the bottom of your feet feel like right now? Wouldn't have even thought about it unless I said something. How does it know? How's it going to know what to filter out and what to take in? Businesses are using it, and like I said, they're sort of in this hype cycle with it now, and they say, like, it works, it does what we need it to do. Let's go, let's use it, let's implement it, and let's start, becoming more efficient. And they have. But again, at some point, the bottom is going to fall out. The reality is going to set in, and they're going to say, like, oh, I thought it could do this. So what do you mean it's wrong? Yeah, oh, it's wrong? Okay. Well, can it just fix itself? People are going to realize that, look, there's a real hard limit to this stuff. And they're going to say, so explain to me again exactly how this stuff works. Well, we already told you. We said it's just predicting the next word. What do you mean it's just predicting the next word? Like, is it just like a game, or is it like random? Well, it's not random, but is it like a game? Pretty much, yeah. I mean, it's basically what it is. It's predicting the next word. Keep that in mind. Always keep that in mind, that this thing that seems so amazing and it seems like it understands you and it understands what it's saying, it's just predicting the next word like a parrot. And that's the exact same thing with AI. I would say even a parrot has more understanding than AI. I think a parrot at least is aware. It has senses, right? It's aware of its surroundings and it can sort of process things. But AI, nope. No awareness, no understanding, just predicting the next word. is that what humans do, right? Humans who are doing knowledge work, who are, whether it's coding, whether it's configuration, whether it's design, whether it's like graphics design, systems design, engineering, architecture, music, right? Any kind of creative arts. Are they just predicting the next word or the next sound? When somebody is writing a song, are they just predicting the next word? I mean, that sounds silly, right? When you say it like that. No, they're coming up with something. They're creating something. When somebody is making music, when they're coming up with a melody or they're coming up with a beat, are they just predicting the next beat? I mean, it sounds so silly when you say it like that. What do you mean predicting? Predicting based on what? Predicting based on what other people have done, right? Predicting what the model is trained on. So with AI, it's not coming up with anything. It's literally mimicking what somebody else came up with. And so this is why I say AI is, these models are always out of date by definition. They have to be out of date. They're trained on what has already happened. They're trained on the past. So you take these books I have on my bookshelf, right? I'm sure AI has crunched through some of these. And if I were to take any one of these books and like just take the sentence, a couple of sentences, put those into a prompt, I guarantee you it would probably spit out something very similar to what's already in one of those books. Did it come up with that on its own? No. Like I said, fancy Google. It's fancy Google. It's just pulling up what it was already trained on. Some practical takeaways here. Number one is don't put all of your eggs into the AI basket. And I've seen a lot of people say, like, oh man, in the tech world, they're like, I've got to get into this. This is the hot thing now. I've got to get into AI. I've got to learn it. And I would say, absolutely, like, you absolutely need to learn it because, like I said, it's not going away. I think it is something you need to learn. You need to understand how it works. Learn to create AI agents. Learn to integrate AI inputs and outputs into a workflow where you have sort of like an AI agent that does something and then maybe it comes up with an output and that goes to another agent. Understand that everybody else is doing that too. Everybody else is working with it too. AI is not just used in terms of like we think of it as like I'm using Chat GPT or whatever, but AI is going to be used in systems where we can't really get away from it. It's going to be trained on data that we produce, usage patterns, right? Whatever you're doing, whatever you're searching, if you have a resume or if you're putting any kind of data out there, it's going to be trained on that and it's going to also be analyzing that, right? Understand that anything, any data you put out there is going to be analyzed by AI and it's probably going to be kind of like scored in some way. There are companies that screen applicants, people who are applying for a job, and they will give a score and the score basically says yes, we recommend hiring this person or no, we don't recommend hiring this person. You've got your profile on LinkedIn. You should not hire this person. You shouldn't even connect to this person. You shouldn't have anything to do with this business or this service, right? So it gets kind of when you say it like that, it gets kind of scary. So I'm not saying this to make us paranoid or feel like we're going to live in some dystopian world here because of AI. You want to be careful about kind of what data you put out there and how AI might interpret it. So one thing that I would recommend doing is I'm going to take my resume and I'm going to take also what's on my LinkedIn and I'm going to just start plugging it into different AI tools, different models, and I'm going to say, should you hire this person? Would you recommend hiring this person? What are some red flags that stand out here? And I'm interested. I'm curious to see, right? Because my name's out there. I don't know if it's going to draw on other things from the internet. But this is why I say be careful about the data you put out there. Because if you do this with your resume or your LinkedIn or your whatever, if your name is out there in some other way, maybe you were interviewed in the news about something, maybe it's going to draw on that. I'll tell you a little story. I'm not going to name anybody's name. There was a particular person who was interviewed by a local news station. This particular person, you can search his name and the interview pops up. Now, I think when he was doing that interview, I don't think he even thought about that. I don't think he thought not just his name, but every word he said in that interview, you can search, you can find it. And it was related to, not being happy about some development being approved. But you can see how this could be kind of used against somebody. Oh, well, I don't want to hire that guy because, he's against building whatever, kind of going a little far afield here, and this kind of stuff can easily be twisted. But that's sort of the point, right? Is we're not really talking about a human looking at this and saying, oh, we're not gonna like not hire the guy because he was mad that somebody was building something close to his house. But an AI, a model, is not going to think like that, right? It's not going to think at all. It's just going to be like, check, check, score. It's going to be doing these. And that's a situation where it is doing a calculation, okay? Predicting the next word, leading to a score or maybe a check or a categorization, and now we perform a computation based on that. If the prediction is, say, like 80%, what's the calculation going to end up being, depending on how things are weighted, compared to what a human, like a smart human, would come up with, a wise human? The AI might be 80, 90%, whereas the human might be like 98%. So, my final point here, final takeaway, and I think this is probably the most important, really, is because we have got so many people now using and depending on AI, the way it talks is very human like. We're seeing a lot of this disconnection from real people. So I would say try your best now to connect with real people. And you've seen this, like I've heard this for years and years and years, is like networking. And I don't mean like computer network. I mean like network with other people. That was the whole point of LinkedIn, really. Network with other people, build your network. And that way, if you need to sell something, you're starting a business, you need funding, you need a job, whatever the case may be, you can reach out to your network. That was the whole point, really, of LinkedIn, was build your network. So if you need something, you can reach out to your network and help each other out, right? Think of almost like a community of peers, colleagues, people who are maybe in the same industry as you. It's crazy, right? We're sort of losing that now because everybody's so focused on AI. So I would say definitely reach out, especially those who you already know personally, already have some kind of relationship with them. Reach out to them. If you are, again, looking for a job, if you are in business, whatever the case may be, just try to connect more with people rather than being so focused on AI. Because what's going to happen is people are going to get starved. They're going to get starved. They're going to get tired of AI's slop and all the emojis, and it's sort of predictable and saying the same things over and over again. They're going to get sort of tired of it, and they're going to realize this doesn't really help me. Just go on, GPT or whatever and say, "Get me a job right now." Is it going to do it? Give me a referral, please. Is it going to do it? No. All right. Well, I think that's about enough for now. Again, just to rehash, embrace AI. Don't become obsessed with it. Know its limitations, okay? And it is a game changer, but it is not a game over. And one other thing, too, I would add is if you see anything that seems off, like do that little exercise I mentioned where AI is maybe it's saying some bad things about you or it's being negative on you, don't be afraid to call that out and say, look, gosh, I hope nobody's actually using this or trusting this because look at what it did. So if you can anytime you can get it to say some crazy things or some things that are wrong, point it out. I would really push that and say, look, it's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong, like it's wrong. And I've heard the objection, people say, well, it's only going to keep getting better. Well, it has gotten better for sure, but let's not fall into the fallacy. There's a fallacy called fatal serialism, which is basically exactly what I just said, that phrase, it's going to keep getting better. At some point, it's going to keep getting better, right? There's going to be a limit. And I think that we're very close to that limit right now, okay? Because it has gotten so much better. And like I said, millions of dollars going into this, weeks and months of training going into this, and this is what we have, okay? Pretty good. It's pretty good, okay? We're not going to lie. It's pretty good. Is it going to keep getting better? Not by much. The idea that, well, it's wrong today 10% of the time, 20% of the time, it's wrong, whatever the number is, that number is going to change, right? Eventually it'll get to be where it's, wrong 1% of the time. No, I don't think so. Because of the nature of it. Remember, it's just a model. It's being trained. And models, the old George Box quote, all models are wrong, but some are useful. All models are wrong. AI is a model. It's going to be wrong. I mean, that's just the nature of it. How wrong is it? What is the tolerance for that? And more importantly, how do you detect when it's wrong and what do you do about it? That's going to require a human.